How's it going? I'm Andy and welcome back. This is episode 5 of Scratchbuild Basics, and this episode's going to be a wee bit different. No build this time. I'm going to try and demonstrate how paint and weather one of my wee bots here. No fancy products or airbrushes or anything like that, just good old paint brushes and some paint and some patience. So yeah, let's get into it. Alrighty, so I've got my canvas here. This is just a bomber I made in the previous video. And then I've got my homemade wet palette with my colours laid out on it here. Just a selection of browns and reds. I've got a burnt umber. And then I've got my country maple. Got some chocolate brown. Some clay. And then some rouge, which is just a red. And then some pomegranate. And then I'm going to use this big scruffy brush just to apply what I'll call a rust coat. That's about as best I could describe it. I'm going to start just with a coat or two of the burnt umber, which is just a dark brown, and I'm going to stipple it on. I'm not brushing it on. I find that the stippling helps the overall texture, and it sort of creates a light and dark areas on its own. And then when I run out of places to hold, I'll just hit it with a hairdryer. It's my girlfriend's hairdryer. Don't tell her I borrowed it for this video. And it just speeds up the drying, and it means I can keep going without smudging everything I've already done. And then I'll just keep going until the burnt umber covers every wee nook and cranny. Get a complete coverage before I move on. So once that first coat of burnt umber is completely dry, I'll move on to the next colour on the palette there, which is country maple, or my light brown. And again, I'm going to stipple it on, but I'll just be a bit more careful and a bit more deliberate about how I put the paint on. I don't want to completely cover the dark brown. And I'm just taking my time, taking it nice and slow, and making sure to turn my brush to keep it random, and making sure I hit all those edges, because I know the edges are going to be exposed. And then again, hitting it with the hairdryer, just so I don't smudge what I've already done. So I've just continued to move down my palette to the chocolate brown and then onto the clay, which I'm using here at the minute. And again, I'm taking my time and being very deliberate. Just stippling it on, making sure to turn my brush. You could probably do this with a sponge, but you just need to be careful getting it into those sort of nooks and crannies, and you need to make sure you didn't overload it. And yep, again, I'll hit it with the hairdryer just to make sure I don't smudge it. So that's the clay finished with. I'll move on now to the red, and this red is really bright, so I'll be very careful. I'll put a very small amount on my brush and just put it in some select areas. I won't go too mad with it. It would very easily cover up everything that I've already done. So yeah, I'm just being a bit more careful with this red, or sorry, this rouge. You can see there in places I've overloaded my brush a wee bit too much. And yeah, went a bit far with it, but it's okay. I'm going to roll with it and move on to the pomegranate. And these colour choices are purely based on what I think I've seen in Rust. You know, it's not based on any colour theory, or I have no knowledge about colour theory, or I'm no expert. I'm just using the colours that I think are right. So I've cleaned my brush off and dried it up and made sure it's good and scruffy. And what I'm going to do now is go back to my first colour and sort of mix it in. Mix the burnt umber with the country maple, and then kind of load my brush half and half, and then go back in and start breaking up some of those brighter colours. So I'm just taking my time, making sure to keep turning my brush, and it keeps the pattern random, and obviously the colours will change between the dark and the light browns, and just going in, covering up any mistakes. Although remember, we don't make mistakes just happy little accidents. Then I'll just continue to move down my palette. Again, I'll load my brush with a mix of the maple and the chocolate brown in the same way I did before, half and half. And I just continue doing this down through my colours, but I make sure to leave out the rouge and the pomegranate, because at this point they're a bit too bright. I want to start dulling them back down again. But yeah, that's about the height of it for the rust coat. It works for me. I probably will end up covering 90% of this, but it means when I am covering it, I can be totally random about where I'm leaving my damage spots. Now at this point, some of the colours, like the pinks and the reds, they do look quite bright and they don't really fit in with the rust, but I'll be giving it a brown wash at the end with some white spirit and some brown oil paint, and it darkens everything down. And even you see now as the colours are drying, they are darkening down a bit, but the wash takes care of all those bright pinks and reds and oranges. And that's my rust coat complete. Need to make sure that's totally dry, and then I'll move on to my main colours, which is this pure pumpkin for the legs, and then I'm going to mix it with some of this white and some of this Bahama blue, just to try and mix it up a bit. Again, I don't know much about colour theory, and I'm just mixing it on a fresh piece of baking paper here, just to try and keep things tidy. And this colour that I'm mixing is actually going to be like an undercoat for the pure pumpkin, and only a tiny part of it will be left exposed, just an edge will be left exposed. But when I mix it here, you'll see it's pretty similar to the colour I was using earlier, but it is more mustardy. And yep, I'll just dab it on the same way I've been applying everything else, but I'm not going to go right to the edges. I'm going to leave those edges exposed. And for the larger areas, I'll dab it on randomly at first, and then I'll just be very careful, start to fill it in a wee bit more, but I'll always want to leave some parts exposed. Just taking my time, dabbing it on, and leaving some areas exposed. If there's too much exposed, I can go back later and add more, but I can't take any away, so I'm just being very careful. And again, leaving those edges exposed, that's where all the wear and tear would be. And this won't be my final colour for the legs, this is just like an undercoat for the pure pumpkin. I'll come back in with the pure pumpkin colour and just leave a small edge of this undercoat just poking out. Moving on to the legs now, it's much of the same thing, but I'll just try to imagine where it would rub off naturally from it moving around or moving through trees or brush or whatever, or just through time. And you can see there, if you're quick enough, you can get away with rubbing it off places you didn't really want it. You know, there wouldn't really been paint on that high point. And I'm just taking my time, dabbing it on, just trying to think about where naturally paint would wear off, or where through natural wear and tear would happen. I tend to be quite random to begin with, and then just slowly start to fill it out. And that's the first coat of yellow done. I'll call that the undercoat. Now I'm gonna take the pure pumpkin and go back and fill in over my undercoat, but I'll make sure to leave the edges of the undercoat exposed. I want to leave those just poking out. You'll see what I mean here. And I'm taking my time, just dabbing away. I don't want to ruin all that texture that I've built up now, so just dab it on slowly, build up that colour.
So I'm following the pattern of the undercoat, but I'm being very careful to leave the edges of the undercoat peeking out. I still want them to be showing. And for large areas, it's the same thing. I just want to be very careful, take it nice and slow. I'm just working my way in slowly here, just creeping up on it, slowly filling in those edges. And that looks good to me. I can move on now and get the rest filled in. And that's the first layer of pure pumpkin done. Now what I'm going to do is go back in again, but this time I'll step back from the edge just a wee bit more. I'll just brighten it up just a wee bit. And I'm still just dabbing it on. I'm not dragging my brush, and there's very little paint on my brush at this point. I really don't want to be overloading my brush too much. And there we go, that's all the colour done on the legs. I will be going back and doing some highlights just with some metallic pewter. And funny, I never listed that at the start, sorry about that. I will be using some metallic pewter later on. But yeah, that's the colour done. You can see the effect there that is created. And then I went ahead and did the same again with some grey on his body. And being a curved surface, I just left random parts exposed. And now I'm going to go back in with my black and fill in up to the lines again, same as I did on the legs basically, just to get that same effect on the body. Again, just taking my time, making sure to leave those places exposed. And I mean, I don't normally paint this fast, this is sped up obviously. And there we go, that's the black finished. I'll just go back with my metallic pewter later and do some highlights in those rusted areas. And then I cut some stencils for my eyes, just literally drew my eyes out on a piece of masking tape and cut them out with a craft knife. And I'm just going to dab in some white, again still dabbing, don't want no brush strokes at this point. Then I just painted in the rest of his eyes freehand and added a grey shadow there. And I painted his lid with some metallic, just dabbed it on the same way I've been doing it everywhere else. And now I'm going to go in with my metallic pewter here and do the rivets. You could just leave these, but I like to do them, I think it makes them pop. And that's all the rivets done. I'm just going to use some of this metallic here around his eye, just for this highlight around his eye. Now, using my metallic, I'm going to take it and dab a tiny bit into some of these weathered, damaged areas. I'm going to be very careful not to put too much in. I'm going to put some along the edges, and anywhere else I think there might be some scrapes or some metal exposed, but very sparingly, very carefully. Now moving on to the body, it's the same thing again, just tiny wee dabs of this metallic inside these worn weathered areas, and not too much paint on my brush, and these brushes are quite small. They're cheap small brushes, but they are quite small. On the ring on top here, I'm going to put a highlight the whole way around, just because I think it looks right. That's pretty much how I work, or how I approach these painting projects. If it looks right to me, that's good enough. I don't really concern myself about what other people are doing or what other things look like. If it looks right to me, I'm happy. I'm just making sure I hit some of those edges just to pick up on all the work that I put in earlier. And making sure I highlight that weld line. I'm really proud of my welding lines. And that's him. Highlights done. You could just leave it there if you wanted to, just give him a coat of lacquer or gloss. But I like to go ahead and give it a coat of brown wash. I think it kind of dulls everything down a wee bit, just makes it look a bit more worn. I'll just put some newspaper down here because this is messy. And this is my wash, just a bottle of white spirit with some brown oil paint in it. Just mix it up. Originally I would have used like acrylic paint, just watered down, with a wee bit of soap in it, but this here stuff's really good, and just plaster it on, just everywhere, get it into every wee nook and cranny. And once it's sufficiently plastered, I'll take a bit of kitchen roll and just start dabbing it off. Just clean up around the eyes, and I'll try to leave it in all the crevices, but yeah, most of it is taken off. And again, you could go a wee bit further and take a smaller brush and put some of the wash on in like drips, or you could splatter it on with a bigger paintbrush. But I'm just gonna give it the wash and clean it off here and call it done. There we go. I'll leave them to dry overnight, and then in the morning I'll give them a coat of lacquer, just spray lacquer from a body shop around the corner. So there you have it. If you made it to the end, nice one. Thanks very much for sticking with me. I hope it was helpful, and you can let me know, sure, if it's worth doing any more painting tutorials. And any questions or comments, you know where to go down below there. Give me a shout. I'm on Instagram as well. The address is in the description there if you want to give me a shout on there. And yeah, I'll see you in the next one. Thanks again. Bye.
Bye.